Hey guys, welcome back to episode 2 of the CR250 Super Single build. We're going to jump straight into this one where we left off. We rebuilt some of the parts on the bike already, the shock, the forks. Now we're going to put everything back together just to get a sense of what the geometry is going to look like. And we also have the fairings that came in from AirTech Streamlining. They're actually down 15 minutes from where I live, so was able to pick up some fairings. We're going to mock them up and see what they look like on the bike, so let's get to it.
Alright, jumping into this one, we are replacing the disc on the front wheel. In the last video I mentioned I got 2 full front ends for a Gsxr 600 2005. This wheel is in great condition, so I'm using this one, but just changing out to a brand new rotor to avoid dealing with a potentially warped one. I attached the rear wheel and linkage to the swing arm and set it up for the frame. If you didn't already know, this is a Generation 2 CR250 swing arm, 2000 to 2001, which will work on my 1997 frame, which is Generation 1. You're going to need to use the Generation 2 linkage and your Generation 1 dog bone. Again, this allowed me to install that CR250 supermoto wheel that you see in the rear, which sits on a 25mm axle. It's a good mod and I recommend it so you don't have to go about modifying older wheels for sumo use. For the front end, I pressed out the Gsxr steering stem and pressed in the CR250 stem into the Gsxr triple tree. You can see the length and the bearing inner diameters match the Gsxr one. I know both stems that I'm showing aren't from a 1997 CR250 or a Gsxr 600, but they're very similar to the ones that I'm using here. I got a local automotive shop to remove the stems for me since it was a bit too long for my bearing press. With the CR250 stem installed, I can use the original bearings as well. For the top triple clamps, you're going to have to widen the stem hole about 1mm for 2004 to 2005 Gsxr forks, just like mine. For 2006 and over, you're going to need to add about a 1mm spacer into that triple slot. Just a heads up on that. Also, here's a little tip to make sure that things are aligned when reinstalling your forks. Make sure all the bolts on the forks and the wheel are loose except for the top triple clamps. Push down on your forks a few times and then retighten everything. This will square everything up in the forks as well as the wheel. Of course, there's 1,000 ways to do this. This is just one of them. Next up, I swapped the oversized desert tank for the stock CR250 tank as we won't need this anymore. And now in goes our rebuilt and lowered shock. Because the Gen 1 dog bone is meant for 14mm bolts and the Gen 2 linkage uses 12, I got a spacer made for the dog bone and pressed it in for the linkage side. This is necessary for the swing arm swap. Here are the fairings from AirTech Streamlining. The tank is actually made for a CR250 Super Single, but it works for this application as well. The seat is from an RS250, which is the AirTech recommendation for a seat. To cut the hole, I used a piece of paper that fit inside the gas cap area and measured it at 120mm. I found the center of that, which is 60mm, and marked the center on top of the fairing. After finding the center line, I've measured the gas cap width on the stock tank. I measured that at 50mm and marked that accordingly on the piece of paper, and then put that onto the fairing. Since I didn't want to buy a hole saw, I just drilled out some holes in a circular pattern, cut out the center with clippers, and used a Dremel to grind out the rest. Remember, wear a face mask when messing with fiberglass, it's very dangerous to breathe. And here's a test fit, which we're going to trim out the rest later with the Dremel tool. So I installed the tank fairing. The tank fairing is actually held down by the gas cap and whatever mounts you make on the subframe, which is that tab that sits on top of the subframe in the back of the tank fairing. Alright, so here's the bike mocked up with all of the suspension, the front ends, and the swing arm put together. The fairing
the tank is now cut, so we have the gas tank going through on the top, and this is just sitting here. It's not connected at all. You can see there's a slight gap here. By slight, I mean pretty good gap size, so I could force it down. I'd much rather make a brand new subframe, especially since this one is cracked over here. But seeing as I don't have a welder, I don't have access to anyone who is welding right now, given COVID and whatnot, we're just gonna have to deal with that the way that it is. I might make some spacers or something here, I'm not too sure. I could braze weld some an aluminum sheet here to fill in the gap. That's pretty easy to do with some aluminum braze rods. But the seats, so I can't decide if I want the seat to be sitting back a little bit more, or so that way I can have this like gap here, right? This will be the gap, so that way I could get the screws to put in the tank fairing properly. I'd rather not cut the inside of the fairing because that's just going to weaken the structure of the fairing. Like this lip here, we could see this needs to get removed off the subframe. On the other side, these tabs that hold the exhaust in place need to be removed as well. So lots of work to do as I go and drop the stuff. So lots of work to do on the subframe. You can see where we need to remove these tabs here. And preferably this needs to be pinched in a bit too. So let's get to it.
To double check fitment, I removed the broken part of the frame. This was repaired by the previous owner with some rivets and glue. It actually held up quite well, but it will be properly fixed in a later episode. For now, it's going to get cut off so we can see how this seat fairing fits on top of the frame. And finally, with the Dremel tool, the last tab gets cut off on the subframe.
Alright, so I cut the tab out and that made all the difference here. The fairing is a lot more flush with the seat. It's still a little high for me, but we'll have to get that welded and fixed. This is what it looks like as it's sitting. It's still kind of tall in the rear, but looks okay. It's not too bad. There's plenty of space to put the screws and bolts in. This is gonna have to get cut out and fixed a bit too. But yeah, it's coming together. Alright, so that'll wrap it up for this episode. Thank you guys so much for watching. Remember, like and subscribe, yada yada yada. On the next episode, we're going to start putting together the rear sets for the bike. These are going to be custom made mounts and rear sets from another bike that we're going to try and mush into this bike and see what we can get out of it. So along with that, we're also going to be working on the caliper and brake. So there's actually a good bit of information there if you wanted to do some sort of conversion on your own bike. So look forward to it, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.